I came out about 4:30 that morning. When I got up to the scene, I noticed a young white male lying in the roadway with severe head trauma. Nothing at the scene appeared that it was a vehicular accident.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Of all the incidents related to the Murdaughs, the most confounding is the Stephen Smith case. What happened to Stephen Smith is more mysterious and inexplicable than the boating incident or what happened to the housekeeper or the double homicide. Do you agree? In fact, it's so confounding, it's not clear whether there is a demonstrable link to the Murdaughs or not. Overnight, I've done a deep dive researching 6 of the original documents. Have a look at them over here. And so over the next 6 episodes, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 new insights that may or may not take the investigation into Stephen Smith's death in the right direction. I want you to try and keep an open mind as you go through them one at a time. You might say, this I totally don't believe, I totally disagree with that. But if you keep an open mind and you go into the next step, you might see that we are moving beyond the limbo that this case has taken us and maybe to a potential breakthrough. So please try to stay curious and try to stay open-minded. Speaking of which, what do you think is the number one clue we all missed? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you are a subscriber but you haven't subscribed to Team Peachtree, please subscribe to that channel. I'll put a link in the description. If you're enjoying this episode, and obviously if you want to keep up to date on the next 5 episodes in this analysis, it's going to be a series of 6 episodes, then please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the notification bell, or you can even hit the thanks button. And let's get started. So early on in the 3rd episode of the Netflix docuseries on the Murdaugh murders, it's called A Southern Scandal, we see the actual crime scene images of Stephen Smith. We see his hand, we see his arm, we see his khaki shorts, we see his shoes, and then we even see an image of him lying in the road. Now, these images are difficult to show on YouTube because they're graphic, and so I'm not going to be showing them in the sort of detail you see on Netflix, so you might want to head that way. The important thing to notice here is that Stephen Smith is lying in a pool of blood. What this tells us is that he was likely killed, and also he was likely struck in situ, in other words, where he was found. This already is an important insight. This already shifts the needle towards a pedestrian being hit by a vehicle of some kind. But as I say, let's try to keep an open mind. The other aspect that one has to look at in detail are the records of insults to the 19-year-old's body. These provide a record of what happened to him. And so the question is, can we interpret them correctly? And so what I want to do is draw your attention to item number 6. So regardless of whether Stephen's remains are exhumed and a second autopsy performed, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but even if they do, the results are likely to echo the original autopsy report from July 8th, 2015. That is the final report issued by the Medical University of South Carolina, MUSC, from their Department of Pathology and Lab Medicine. Now, that one exception, I think what they're not going to find performing a second autopsy is due to the advanced decomposition. I'm not sure they'll be able to observe the 6th item listed under diagnosis in this final autopsy report. Let's have a look at it. It refers to, quote, irregular abrasions and contusions, unquote, on Stephen's arms. And what that does suggest is that not only was he struck at the site where he was found, but also that there was some motion, there was some tumbling, there was some impact on the tar. If you're a cyclist, then you know what that looks and feels like. And so it looks like there was some dragging, or that his body was flung over the tar, causing these idiosyncratic road rash type scars. What this suggests is that it's unlikely Stephen was struck, say, with a baseball bat in a different location and then taken somewhere else and then dropped on the road. If that were the case, one would expect to see blood evidence, blood drops beyond the area where he was found, and I'm not sure whether you'd see the sort of road rash type injury. And so that's the one observation to make. The other one is kind of confusing to some extent. In other words, it means our assessment isn't so clear-cut after all. So I'm unsure what extensive skull fractures refers to in the autopsy report. And since there's no illustration of precisely where these injuries occurred, it's difficult to determine whether this means essentially severe fractures resulting from the same object, the same impact, the same hitting of the skull once, or multiple fractures from multiple impacts. So it'll be interesting to see an autopsy dealing with that question. As mentioned previously, a blunt force situation involving intentional harm would likely include several blows with a particular object, whereas being struck by a vehicle would tend to include one severe injury, one sort of primary or principal injury within secondary but lesser injuries. And so what are we dealing with here? The right shoulder dislocation also suggests that whatever struck Stephen did so forcefully. The question is this a force a human being could muster or a machine? Just what kind of force are we dealing with? And that then brings us to the number one clue we all missed. So the second aspect to note from the autopsy report is a cerebral contusion that initially led investigators to believe Stephen had a projectile wound to his head, which in turn caused them to declare the incident a homicide. Take a look at investigator Perry Singleton's observation below of a hole in the skull above the victim's right eye. But a failure to turn up a cartridge as well as the state of the brain underneath the injury suggests no firearm was used and that the injury wasn't caused by a projectile after all. Now, I do think it's fortunate that this error occurred because it led to investigators treating the scene like a crime scene, like the scene of a homicide. And thus they searched the area carefully for evidence. And this then led them to the remarkable discovery that there was none. No skid marks, no tire tracks, no glass, no plastic or metal fragments. And so what is the key takeout? Well, it's easy to dismiss the injury that suggested a bullet wound to the scalp after ascertaining that it wasn't. So it's not a bullet wound and then you forget about that injury. But this is the number one clue we all missed. Very likely, not so much a blunt object, but a sharp object caused this injury. So that's already giving us a very important clue in terms of what caused this injury, and also perhaps how it was caused. And so trying to figure out what the sharp object could be brings us to the number two clue we all missed. And in terms of that, have a look at this image. A clue to the number two clue may potentially be in this image. Do you see it? And so I'll be dealing with that in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.